Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Today, we want to talk a little bit about comps and how we use comps in our transactions. I'm Ryan Hartzell with Oxford Partners. I have joined me Chase McAteer with Oxford Partners. We're both managing partners. So let's just go ahead and jump into it. Chase, can you start us off by just explaining why Texas is such a challenging environment to find comps?
Well, yeah. So obviously, it's a non-disclosure state. So that's really the challenge is people aren't required to post these comps anywhere. It's honestly by design seems to be the aim of most actors involved in the process to not disclose it. So really, it's everyone has their own reasons why they might not want it to be public. So obviously, if you're agents, you may not want everyone knowing details about what's transacting. If you're the business and there's tax implications involved, you may not want that public. And then if you're the landlord and there's a lease transaction, same thing. You don't want other tenants that may be entering negotiations soon to know exactly what's going on in the building. So there's lots of incentives to keep that quiet if you can, which just makes it a little more difficult to gather that intel.
And as a lot of our commission agreements and lease agreements state that we're not to share details of the lease. Although I always find it funny when some of the landlord agents then ask us for comps themselves. I'm like, your own documents say we can't do that. It's still done, but definitely it's softened based off of those rules. And as agents too, they don't want those lease expirations floating out there. Maybe a competitor calling their clients. That's another.
Sure.
So
Sure.
okay, and then next we have what sources are available for comps, how we consolidate that. And so the most obvious, the easiest one is just our internal database. Oxford Partners, our firm, we do a lot of deals. So we internally generate our own transactions, actually part of what we do in our agent meeting every Monday morning. Anyone that invoiced a deal the week before is given a deal sheet to fill out. We try to review those in person as much as possible just to talk about the deal, just keep updated on the market. And then that goes on our internal comps database. A lot of people are familiar with CompStack. That's a very prominent lease and sales comps platform where you put in some comps, you can get some in return. So we like to look there. There's also an enriched data that not as many people know about. That's more of an appraisal website, but there's lots of good sales and lease comps in there. There's also a company called TREP, TREPP. We are new to that, so I can't attest to it completely, but they track all the commercial mortgage-backed security properties. And with that comes appraisal valuations and sales comps. So you can get some good information there. I made a joke about the landlord agents, but we found if we provide a comp to a landlord agent, you can get 2, 3, 4, 5 in return. They really appreciate seeing the deals that are getting done in competitive buildings. So you can swap there. And then we just have tenant rep friends that will share comps with. And then we also have, again, new to Oxford Partners, but we're starting to experiment with it, ren.co, ren.co. And that's an intent website. It'll scrape the internet. And there's a category called deal brokered. So whenever a deal is published, it will capture that and send you a notification. So we don't have the deal terms in that case, but it's good to know the tenant and the building and the brokers and the agents that worked on that deal. We have a personal relationship with some of them. So we'll call them up and ask them for insights, kind of get some comps off the record. So that's how we do it.
And then, so people ask is when you're trying to get these comps, which is more challenging to get, and when trying to evaluate the comps, lease versus sale comps. And really the answer is both. They're both challenging to get and to qualify. Obviously, if you're looking at a lease transaction, you've got the quality and the strength of the tenant involved, where the landlord and their lender cycle is with the loan for the building, if there is one, different objectives for the tenant or for the landlord that may affect how they negotiate the deal and what terms they would accept. And then obviously all the different concessions that can go into making a deal work, how the rent abatement works and how the tenant improvement allowance is structured and who's doing what work and what timing those payments are happening. And there's lots of different factors there that are tough to necessarily get if someone just gave you the 3 bullet points of the deal, you may not be really have
Right.
a picture of that.
And then the lease comps are a little easier. Every deal is different, but you can get the tenant, you can gauge the tenant quality, and then the lease term, free rent, tenant improvement allowance. It's kind of like more black and white. Even then, though, landlords are in different cycles, like one comp, and then 6 months later, and it might be a completely different situation. But it's a little easier than in the sales comps because there's tons of different factors and
Exactly. Yeah.
looking at comp, you don't know what the condition of the MEPs and the property were, or just the land, if it was stabilized or not. So there's a lot that goes into it.
age of the building, deficiencies in the major MEPs, the size of the land. If you're looking at industrial property, how much of it might be stabilized? Is there rail access, utilities, and other infrastructure that may be there or not there, or need to be upgraded depending on the tenant's or the buyer's use? Beyond a sale transaction, there's all kinds of other factors involved
Right.
that again are challenging.
And then one lesson we learned is you can have all these wonderful comps, and if you don't have an easy way to share those with your clients and your agents, then it's not really as useful and meaningful. And so we've evolved how we maintain our comps database. Mentioned previously, we have the Monday morning agent meeting where we review the deal. That's certainly impossible. That's important. But then all those comps get fed into our internal database. We started out just by a shared Google sheet, and we have a virtual assistant that kind of helps maintain all this data from internally and then all the comps that we're getting from different sources. But it used to just be like in a Google sheet, and that was useful. It was shared, and you could download it, edit it, email that to clients or other agents. But we've recently pivoted to Scout Space, which is our online property survey platform. They also have a comps database in there where we load all that stuff up, and then you can search by different types of properties when we input the comp, and just like a lot of different factors to sort that down. And it generates these nice little online reports or PDFs to look at. And so it is quite an improvement and kind of shows a map where it's at. It'll take a little picture of the street view, which, is important when you're comparing industrial comps because there's so much more variety in industrial distribution versus manufacturing. We found that's just like a really easy way to generate relevant comps and then share them with your clients. So we love Scout Space for that. And then finally, Chase, we talk a little bit about how we actually use these comps. Ultimately, it's to one, understand where the market is, make sure we're getting a good fair market deal, or we always aim to get a better than fair market deal. So that's important. But so how do we use those comps against the competition landlords to get the best deal?
First off, we can use it to demonstrate how good we are at negotiating deals and pick up business. So, of course, we're going to do that, or like to do that whenever we can.
Right.
But also, when you're negotiating deals, sometimes you'll have agents that maybe are less familiar with the market, or they're trying to educate a landlord that's less familiar with the market. Certainly, we run into both of those scenarios frequently. And to have verified comps that it's black and white, it is what it is. Here's the market. Here's what your competitors are doing. Here's what similar size deals look like in this market, in this sub-market, in this street. That really helps go a long way on both of those scenarios. Sometimes it's the tenant side, sometimes the tenant knows it, and they're trying to educate their owner and get them familiar with it. And it helps get the deal done, really, when otherwise it might not. We're all about trying to help our clients get into the right fit, the right building, and also make sure that the right terms to fit the market, and it helps us do that.
Yeah. And my favorite part, as you just described, is just helping the landlord agent communicate actually what's happening outside the building, because sometimes they're a little scared or timid to disagree with their landlord client too much because that's who pays them. So we can come in and provide those black and white comps. And as you know, when we negotiate these transactions, sometimes they're like, oh, thank goodness you have some good comps. I can just forward this along to the landlord, and it's easier for them to make that argument to come down for better tenant deal, a more fair market. All right, that's it, guys. Appreciate your time, Chase. Thanks for joining us.